In cemeteries and churchyards across the UK, you will find a green and white sign that looks like this one near the entrance to that site. That is how you'll know that that is a place where we care for the men and women of the Commonwealth forces who died in the First or Second World War. Today I am in East Kilbride Cemetery. In this cemetery, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission care for 26 servicemen and women from the Commonwealth forces. 3 servicemen who we commemorate here served during the First World War and the rest served during the Second World War. The majority come from across the UK and one is from Australia. The first individual that I would like to speak about in this tour is Major Robert Mathers Mann. He is commemorated by the Commonwealth War Grave Commission on this Gallipoli marker. The reason being is that his family or next of kin had decided to mark his grave with a private memorial that they had chose instead of a commissioned war grave. The Commonwealth War Grave Commission does not own or maintain private memorials, but we do however monitor their condition to ensure the individual who we commemorate that their name is legible. But if a private memorial becomes too degraded, the Commission seeks permission to add one of our pedestal or Gallipoli markers to the grave to make sure that the war casualty is properly commemorated, which is what has been done in this instance. Major Robert Mathers Mann is the highest ranking casualty cared for by the Commonwealth War Grave Commission in East Kilbride Cemetery. He was born in 1869 in Bothwell, South Lanarkshire, the son of James Mann, who was a partner in a Glasgow drapery firm called Mann, Byers & Co. The firm had extensive premises located in Argyle Street, Glassford Street and Virginia Street. Robert had initially worked for his dad as a drapery warehouseman before eventually becoming an insurance inspector. He was a very keen sportsman. He was a secretary and treasurer of the Holy Loch Sailing Club. He was a member of Troon Golf Club as well as Busby Bowling Club and Queen's Park Football Club. He married a woman called Margaret, and in the early 1900s, both Robert and Margaret would move from their house in Kelvinside to Rubeg in Busby with their daughter Mary and son James. During the war, Robert held the rank of Major in the 5th Battalion Scottish Rifles, also known as the Cameronians. He was awarded the Volunteer Officer's Decoration, which is a medal that was typically awarded at the time to officers and above of the UK's volunteer force for a very long and meritorious service. Robert was working on the Army's General Staff in Stirling when he died of chronic hepatitis at just 48 years old on the 20th of November 1917. Just 3 days after his death, Robert would be cremated and buried in his family lair. His name was added to the memorial stone that had previously been erected for his son James, who had died when he was 3. In East Kilbride Cemetery, we also have a war grave plot, and a plot is usually when there is Commonwealth War Graves Commission war graves right next to each other in a row. The only Australian that we commemorate in this cemetery, that is Sergeant Ross Walker Davidson. He served with the Royal Australian Air Force. He was the son of Arthur David and Ellen Davidson of Narborough, New South Wales. Ross had enlisted with the Royal Australian Air Force on the 9th of December 1940. He died of acute leukaemia on the 24th of October 1941 when he was just 21 years old. Now, what's unusual about this headstone is that there are actually 2 servicemen commemorated in the same plot, and it's unlikely that they knew each other given that Gunner Herbert Edward Miles was Scottish. He was a local and he was not part of the Air Force. He was actually part of the 6th Maritime Regiment in the Royal Artillery, and Davidson instead was part of the Royal Australian Air Force. Now, the reason you actually might find more than one serviceman buried in the same plot is because their families most likely couldn't afford a plot by themselves in the cemetery. So they would go to their son or daughter's unit commander and ask them if there was another family in their situation who couldn't afford to pay for a plot in the cemetery. And if their commander got back to them and said, yes, there is, then they would liaise with the other family and would come to an agreement, split the costs, and then their loved ones would be buried in the same plot with each other, which was why most likely we have an Australian and a Scot buried in the same grave. He is not the only one who is in that situation. In this plot, we have 12 servicemen buried and commemorated by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. Yet, we only have 6 grave markers. As you can see, all of the 12 casualties' names are actually commemorated by the Commission on these headstones. Another person I'd like to speak about is Private Stephen Brennan. He is also commemorated by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission on a private memorial, but in his case, his memorial stone is in quite good nick, which is why we have highlighted his name in black ink to make it more legible, rather than adding a pedestal or Gallipoli marker. He's a son of Stephen and Margaret Welsh Brennan, who lived in 85 Belgrove Street in Denniston, Glasgow. You may still be able to see his house today. Let me know if you're able to in the comment section below. Stephen served in the 18th Battalion of the Highland Light Infantry, and as you know, the Highland Light Infantry tended to recruit more in the Glasgow and surrounding areas. Stephen died on the 3rd of October 1920 due to bronchitis. He may have contracted this infection during his service, or his service may have made him more susceptible to this disease, which is why he is commemorated by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. His death certificate records his occupation as clerk at the time of his death. He left behind his parents. Stephen never married or had any kids. He was 24 years old when he died. You may have noted that Stephen died in 1920, which is slightly out with the dates we traditionally considered to be the end of the First World War. As we all know, the First World War ended in 1918, but the reason the Commission still commemorate servicemen and women who died slightly beyond 1918, especially if they served during the First World War, is because the dates what we consider to be the official end of the war for both the First and Second had actually been extended, mainly due to administrative purposes. A lot of individual peace treaties needed to be signed, and that sort of thing. So personnel from the armed forces and other recognised auxiliary organisations who qualified to be commemorated by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission during either the First or Second World War would only be commemorated by us provided they died within the qualifying dates, which for the First World War would be from the 4th of August 1914, which is the day of declaration of war by Britain, to the 31st of August 1921. And for the Second World War, the date would be the 3rd of September 1939, when Britain declared war, to the 31st of December 1947. And we tend to use these to mark the beginning and end of the First and Second World War. This here is the grave of the only woman commemorated by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission in East Kilbride Cemetery, a Private Marion Craig Baird Dixon. She served with the Auxiliary Territorial Services, also known as the ATS. Queen Elizabeth II was also a member of the ATS during the Second World War, and the Queen actually trained as a military truck driver and mechanic. Of course, she would have been the princess then, not the Queen. Marion was the daughter of Alexander Douglas and Marion Craig Dixon of Hamilton. She died on the 20th of December 1946. She was just 25 years old. This here is the grave of Corporal William Hanna, who served in the 2nd Battalion of the Scots Guard. He was the son of Robert and Helen Vincent Hanna, husband of Elizabeth Henderson Hanna, who was originally from Glasgow. William died on the 25th of February 1947 at just 36 years old. And this here is what a typical Commonwealth War Graves Commission grave marker usually looks like. We tend to use granite in Scotland, but other stones are used as well. It just depended on the availability at the time. This here is an example of a Portman headstone.